Hey guys, I'm Nick and welcome back to Sci-Finatics. Well, today we're talking about episode 6 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, season 2, entitled Lost in Translation. This was sort of a bit of a suspense, thriller kind of episode. We had some creepy stuff going on with Uhura hallucinating about zombies and murders in the hallway and all kinds of other mysterious stuff with creepy things going on inside nebulas and dimly lit hallways and everything. So this was kind of playing for the sort of suspense thriller angle, this episode. We had the return of Hema, even if it was just in some recordings or some memories from Uhura. I think that was a really nice touch to kind of see Hema again, and we kind of thought we'd lost him forever. So it was nice to see him pop up again in a sort of a past archival kind of sense in this episode. And we have of course got the return of the official James Kirk in this episode. Obviously, we've had a couple of appearances of Kirk before in Strange New Worlds, but they've always been in an alternate timeline kind of scenario. They've never kind of been in our sort of prime timeline. This episode was our first foray into the official Kirk in this episode. So let's get into this week's breakdown and review of episode 6, Lost in Translation of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. So first off in this episode, it appears that the Enterprise, along with the USS Farragut, is doing some maintenance work on a deuterium refinery which is located within this nebula, which happens to be a stellar nursery for young stars. It appears we've got a bit of a promotion, which is a little bit of a foreshadowing, I guess, with Captain Pike taking over the overall command of the refinery, as well as the Farragut and the Enterprise. So he's kind of been given the temporary rank of fleet captain. He had a different Starfleet insignia on his uniform to kind of denote that he had this particular rank, which is sort of a little bit of a foreshadowing of his accident coming in the future, because we know he is promoted to fleet captain when the accident occurs. So we're sort of like, oh, this is kind of we seem to be heading in the direction of his accident a little sooner than I maybe would have thought was the case. But I guess we'll see whether in next week's episode he just goes back to being regular captain again. But this promotion to fleet captain, I think, is more to do with making sense of canon, linking back to original series, which I'll explain later in this review. During the whole process of the refueling of the Enterprise amidst the deuterium cloud within the nebula and everything, we get to see a bit of a return of Hema. Uhura's doing some work in the cell control and everything, and she's playing back a recording that was previously made when Hema was alive, just to kind of give her a bit of a tutorial, a bit like, I guess, let's face it, we all from time to time go onto YouTube and, search up rewire something or, some sort of engineering kind of task. And I guess Uhura was going to the back to her, pad to bring up a recording that she'd made when Hema was alive, where he gave her some instruction as to how to fix something in engineering. So it was really good, I thought, to see Hema again in this episode. I'm glad that we got an appearance by Hema post-mortem. I think that was a really nice touch to kind of, also see Uhura's connection and everything to him, because obviously there was a connection between these two characters. So that was kind of cool to see that. I did laugh out loud when Pelia was referring to Hema as, he was one of my best students. Oh, well, not really. He was just okay, but I just had to say that because he's dead, So I love that kind of tact, or the lack of tact, I guess, that Pelia has. She's very outspoken, very opinionated, and I guess when you get to be 1,000 years old, social graces and everything, you haven't got time for that anymore, So I love that kind of aspect to Pelia's character. It's very funny. And next we see the first sort of our weird, scary symbolism or whatever. Uhura's been watching these videos of Hema. She thinks she sees a zombified Hema in the turbo lift, which is quite frightening and obviously a very scary message for her. Initially, obviously, they think this is as a result of deuterium exposure and that Uhura's a bit overworked, so she needs a bit of rest. take some meds to get rid of the deuterium exposure, but hallucinations are just all in her head, so to speak. We get some nice interaction between Pelia and Una in the space station control center or whatever of the refinery, where we sort of establish this rivalry between these two. Obviously, Una's the superior officer, but Pelia has the experience. They're sort of tolerating each other through gritted teeth. Uhura's having trouble sleeping. She's tossing and turning, having dreams of a crash on a planetary surface. There are these weird imageries that are coming into her head. Next, we see James Kirk coming on board the Enterprise, being greeted by his brother Sam. Good to see some stuff with Sam and James, I think. All of our interactions previously to now have all been kind of very separated with the whole Kirk brothers, but this was a good opportunity to see them, being brothers and getting a little bit of family history between these two and everything. So that was cool to find out, and also that Kirk is on the cusp of being promoted to first officer of the Farragut, which is a pretty big deal for him, being one of the youngest first officers in Starfleet at this particular moment in time. And it was good to see a reference to George Kirk, the character that Chris Hemsworth played in the 2009 J.J. Abrams Star Trek film, and his role as first officer on the Kelvin. We find out through Pelia that there's sabotage going on aboard the station. Some things aren't right, and they have to track down this saboteur that's been mucking up some of the systems on the refinery. We see a little bit about the evolution of the relationship between Spock and Chapel, coming on from last week's episode, where they seem to be enjoying themselves. The relationship seems to be going okay, but Spock being very logical, he wants to kind of inform Starfleet of their relationship, whereas Chapel wants to keep things on the QT. She's sort of like, let's just play it cool for now, see how things go, don't make any announcements just yet. Let's just see what's going on here before there is anything official to report, which seems consistent with what we know of Spock and Chapel's relationship from original series. It was all very much on the hush hush and the QT. We get the first in a series of first meetings between Kirk and his soon to be actual crew from original series, where he meets Uhura in the bar or the mess hall or whatever we're calling that, that nightclub bar kind of space that they've got going on. So it was pretty nice to see in this episode this team up going on between Uhura and Kirk. Uhura's hallucinating again. She's going pretty crazy at this point, seeing stabbed and disembodied kind of crew members in the hallway and everything, and then she's attacking herself with a knife and then accidentally punches Kirk in the face. Obviously he's there sort of seeing her try to fight herself in her mind or whatever in this hallucination, but he's there in real life trying to kind of stop her, and he ends up getting socked in his nose for the trouble. This episode has a nice kind of suspense, investigative kind of tone to it, where we kind of see Kirk and Uhura teaming up, and they're all trying to solve this mystery about what's going on and why the hallucinations are happening, and it's all a bit creepy, and it's sort of, I quite enjoyed the sort of tension of the tone of this episode, which was a sort of a nice change. Next, we find out the cause of the sabotage, which is another crewman, Ramon, who was one of the workers on board the space station. He has been trying to sabotage the system. He's got voices in his head, much like Uhura has. He's been afflicted by these hallucinations as well, but he seems to be more advanced. He's really been going through this for much longer than Uhura has. And he's kind of gone a bit crazy as a result. Meanwhile, Uhura is still hallucinating. She's imagining the whole bridge on red alert status and the front view screen cracking and our bridge crew being swept out into space and everything. Meanwhile, Ramon's being treated in sickbay and he escapes, and there's a bit of a hunt down for him to be recovered, and Uhura ends up finding him in nacelle control, and she tries to talk him down. He obviously has been going through this far worse than she has been. He manages to inflict some pretty critical damage. Kirk comes to the rescue at the last minute to save Uhura, beam them out of there with an emergency beam out as the whole side of the nacelle blows out into space, and Ramon is killed. A quite exciting sequence. It was kind of, ooh, this is really heating up now. Or in Ramon's case, cooling down as he froze in space. We had the first meeting of Pike and Uhura and Kirk in this episode. Now, I got to say, I loved the way they got around the whole technicality of Pike and Kirk not meeting until Pike was promoted to fleet captain, which we assumed was when he was basically handing over the reins of the Enterprise. But because Pike was temporarily promoted to fleet captain for this particular assignment, they managed to get around that little error in canon in terms of when Pike and Kirk actually met.
You ever met Chris Pike?
We met when he was promoted to fleet captain.
About your age. Big, handsome man, vital, active.
I took over the Enterprise from Spock, served with him for several years.
So I think this was a really clever way of getting around that technicality to make fans happy and not breaching canon in any way. It's quite a good little moment with Latta bumping into Kirk, and obviously she's still affected by her little rendezvous with him back in the 21st century with a little time travel moment. So even though Kirk wasn't privy to any of this, Prime Kirk that is, Latta still remembers what went down and everything, so she's kind of emotionally affected as well, and you can kind of see it in this scene, which I think was a nice little touch. There's some nice moments between Latta and Kirk talking about his dad helping people and sacrificing his sort of family time to aid others in more need and everything, which was a nice sort of emotional scene between these two characters. I thought that was kind of a good, and the fact that we had obviously a little bit more history about George Kirk and everything on the USS Kelvin and whatnot, I think was a nice addition to some canon info. I love the scene with Pelia and Una kind of going at it with each other, just bickering, and Una's calling Pelia a space hippie, and she's got crumbs and everything all down her uniform, and she looks like an absolute slob, and yeah, it was a funny scene. Pelia is so quirky, and she just doesn't care about anything. She just isn't interested in formalities and niceties, and she's just lived long enough that she just doesn't care about all those things anymore, and she just wants to kind of do her job. And there's some nice little comedic scenes of conflict here that I think showcase her character really nicely. Kirk and Uhura go over Ramon's logs, and they find out that all of his afflictions were pretty much the same as hers. Before long, they work out that it's some sort of communications from aliens who live in the nebula, who are trying to communicate with them to stop them refining the deuterium because it's basically harming them. I like the speech that Kirk gave to Uhura. It really, when he talked about dealing with death and everything, and how that affects us and everything, it sort of reminded me of that speech that Kirk gave in original series about dealing with risk and risk being their business. It sort of felt like it was along those sort of lines. So there was definitely a few moments in this episode where I kind of go, oh yeah, like I can see the Shatner Kirk, just coming out in sort of, little subtle glimpses, with the Paul Wesley Kirk. I think there was just enough moments in this episode where we kind of saw that, so that you can go, oh yeah, like I can recognise glimpses of the Kirk that we know here now. We get a bit more of the Hema video from Uhura, which is, again, good to see Hema again in any capacity. Everybody misses Hema. Everybody's still going through Hema loss, I think, even though Pelia seems to be, a very quirky and a nice addition to the cast. It's also, obvious that everybody misses Hema quite a bit. It's just good to see him back, even if it is just for one episode. Uhura ends up getting more and more visions, seeing crashed shuttles on planets, and seeing more images of a sort of a zombified Hema, with the aliens basically trying to communicate with her that what they're doing with the refining of the deuterium in the nebula is basically harming them. So Uhura basically says, we've got to evacuate the station immediately and blow the crap out of it. I'm kind of surprised that Pike kind of went along with this plan so quickly and didn't kind of question Uhura in any way, shape or form, or even anybody kind of come up with alternatives. Like, is there a way we can kind of do this without harming them or anything? Just, yep, let's get everybody out and blow it up as quickly as we can. It's like, I don't think Starfleet's going to be too happy about this. I think they're going to take a lot of convincing. Station gets evacuated and destroyed. Aliens are saved. We get a little glimpse of zombie Hema turning into a live Hema as a bit of a recognition to Uhura to say, yep, that was what we needed you to do. You did the right thing. Everybody's well now, and see you later. So yeah, that was a nice, that communication through that memory of Hema, I think, was handled in a really, really lovely way. And again, great to see Bruce Horak back as Hema in this episode, even if it is in a kind of a flashbacky kind of sense. We find out a bit more about the history between Pellia and Una in the shuttlecraft leaving the station, where it turns out that, Pellia gave Una a C in starship maintenance. Una's a little bit maybe aggressive towards Pellia because she's sad for having lost Hema, and every time she looks at Pellia, she just sort of, is reminded by the loss of Hema in the previous season. So that's kind of understandable. And I think they kind of work out their differences in this moment. The episode ends in our recreation lounge, with some jazz that even Riker would be proud of, I think. It's like this sort of jazz band moments. I think I'm pretty sure we had Riker in a jazz band or something, and whether it was 10 Forward or the holodeck and so forth, I sort of almost expected him to pop up on the trombone or something at some point. So I was like, it was sort of reminiscent of some of those moments in Next Generation with the whole jazz ensemble or whatever there to create a bit of atmosphere and mood. And the episode ends with the very first introduction between Spock and Kirk for the very first time, shaking hands, and maybe sharing some more stories about how Sam Kirk irritates the hell out of both of them. There's obviously some shared feelings there between Spock and James about Sam Kirk. So that was kind of a nice little way into a bonding moment between those two. All in all, I enjoyed this episode. I think it was great to see Hema again. We got a bit more character development with Pellia, our chief engineer, and some really quirky moments between her and Una. And we got a bit of suspense and a little bit of creepy horror stuff creeping in there as well, which makes for an interesting episode, because we know next episode is going to be our Lower Decks crossover episode, which is going to play out for full-on comedy, which meant this episode kind of played for suspense thriller kind of, angles and so forth, which I think was probably a nice contrast between what is going to be this episode and the next one. But guys, let me know what you think. Leave your thoughts in the comments section. Let me know what you thought of episode 6 of season 2, Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Lost in Translation. And we'll get chatting about that. Guys, if you haven't subscribed to Sci-Finatics yet, please don't forget to do that. It really helps the algorithm and everything. I think about 80% of my viewership comes from non-subscribed people. So every one of you that subscribes really helps the channel out. Just let the algorithm know that people are interested in my content. So I really appreciate it if you haven't subscribed. Click on that button and do so. Also check out my merch store, t-shirts, hoodies, mugs, caps, heaps of cool stuff there. Also in support of the channel as well. Pick yourself up a bargain. They're all really well made and good quality, and all at very reasonable prices. I'll be back really soon with my next video. I'll catch you guys soon.